Hey, everybody. Thank you for being here. We are going to hang on just a little bit until Facebook gets here, but it's a thrill to see Three Forks, Montana here and Lawrence, Kansas, Ringe, New Hampshire. Is it Adina, Minnesota, or Edina? I've actually read a novel set there. Montreal, Georgia, Scottsdale, Arizona, Connecticut. Please let me know when Facebook is on. And there we go. We have Brenham, Texas on from Facebook, and Canada, and Albuquerque, New Mexico. So we're all here. Thank you all for being here today. It is my great pleasure to have a chance to talk with Representative Hakeem Jeffries, a Democrat of New York, who is the House Minority Leader. That is the leader of the Democrats and shepherding the country through this shutdown. Thank you so much for being here, Leader Jeffries.
Good evening. Great to be with you.
So I hope you don't mind me jumping right in, first of all, with a question that is kind of bugging me. What does it look like on Capitol Hill in this shutdown? Are the Republicans even there?
It's a great question. Republicans are missing in action, and that, in fact, has been the case over the last 3 weeks. Speaker Johnson actually has canceled votes 2 weeks ago, canceled votes last week, and then once again canceled votes this week, which is an extraordinary thing, but it's consistent with the approach that Republicans have taken under Donald Trump, which is a take it or leave it, my way or the highway. We're going to do everything that we can to jam our extreme right-wing agenda down the throats of the American people, which is what has led us to this government shutdown. Now, we were very clear as Democrats that we will try to find bipartisan common ground, sit down, meet with anyone, anytime, any place over the last several weeks to avoid a government shutdown and now reopen the government. But we have to find a path toward actually enacting a spending agreement that meets the needs of the American people in terms of their quality of life. And we've also made clear that we will not support a partisan Republican spending bill that continues to gut the health care of the American people.
So you expressed a willingness to negotiate, but is there literally any person there with whom you can negotiate?
That's the challenge. And Mike Johnson and John Thune have largely gone radio silent ever since the White House meeting that we had on September 29th. And that's probably because their boss, Donald Trump, has not given them permission to have a conversation with Democrats. And the reality of what we've seen under complete Republican control of government in this Congress is an abdication of the responsibility that Republicans should otherwise have to function as if they are part of a separate and co-equal branch of government. We don't work for Donald Trump. We don't work for J.D. Vance. We don't work for their billionaire donors like Elon Musk. We work for the American people. But what we've consistently seen throughout this year is that congressional Republicans just take orders from Donald Trump. He says jump, they say how high, and they've consistently rubber stamped his extreme agenda. And somehow, Heather, expected that Democrats were going to do exactly the same thing, as opposed to addressing the Republican healthcare crisis that is devastating everyday Americans all across the country.
Well, I have to confess, this surprised me as well. I did think that at least in the Senate, the Republicans would defend the prerogatives of Congress, and they have not done so. And I'm especially alarmed as this shutdown drags on at the many ways in which it appears that the director of the Office of Management and Budget, Russell Vought, and the Deputy White House Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, and the President, Donald Trump, have used this opportunity to gather more power into their own hands. So we have, of course, and I know you've talked about this today, maybe you want to say some more about it, the announcement that there would be $20 billion more dollars used to support Argentina, the idea that we had in the New York Times today that there has been a presidential finding suggesting the CIA can engage in covert operations in at least Venezuela and possibly Colombia as well. And then, of course, the idea that Trump can simply use the government as his own piggy bank to put the money wherever he, rather than Congress, thinks it belongs. Is this a concern for people other than the historians watching the destruction of the powers of Congress?
Yeah, it's an absolute concern for all of us. Unfortunately, on the Democratic side, unfortunately, it doesn't appear to be a concern for our Republican colleagues. I mean, Donald Trump and his administration have overreached into congressional authority in a variety of different ways. Congress has the power to declare war pursuant to the Constitution. We've seen overreach from the Trump administration in that regard, including now as it relates to the aggressive military actions that have been taken off the coast of South America. It's Congress that has the power as it relates to tariffs. But Trump, of course, using so-called emergency authority, which is his gateway into presidential overreach on all the things, including on the tariffs that are crushing everyday Americans, raising costs by thousands and thousands of dollars per year. But Congress, on the Republican side, has refused to reassert our authority in the tariff space. And of course, as you know, being one of our most prominent historians, not just in the nation, but in the world, that America, and the construct that we have pursuant to the Constitution, that it's Congress generally and the House specifically that has the power of the purse. And yet what we've seen, and part of the challenge that we're confronting right now in the context of this government shutdown, is that Donald Trump has reached into congressional authority to make decisions that his administration is not authorized to make with respect to the expenditure of taxpayer dollars. And Republicans in both the House and the Senate have remained quiet. They're missing in action. They could care less. They're burying their heads in the sand. And it's an extraordinary abdication of their constitutional duties and responsibilities.
I will admit that when the House decided that a day was not a day for the purposes of challenging the president's tariff powers, I thought that would turn a lot of heads, and it sort of seemed to have gone by the wayside. But I'm going to ask you to speculate, and if you don't want to, I understand why not. But why do you think this is the case? If you were writing a history of this time, I have to confess, I did not see this full a capitulation coming. I expected some people to capitulate, but again, I'm really surprised to see Congress decide that it no longer appears to care about what you identify quite correctly as the order of the US Constitution, that the House of Representatives will be the place where all appropriations bills start. And they seem not simply to care. Why do you think they are doing that?
I think the Republican Party has turned into a cult-like entity. And so they're behaving like wholly owned subsidiaries of Donald Trump and the Trump administration. And that, I think, is just the very unfortunate reality of the situation that the country now confronts. The framers, I think, could have never expected to see something like this. Now, they were concerned that, one day a Trump-like figure would be elected and try to change the trajectory of the country. I think I was fascinated to learn when studying some of the writings of the framers in connection and preparation for the first impeachment trial that took place in 2020, that the word that was used the most, it appears, during the Constitutional Convention was not what I would have expected. I think my first guess may have been, democracy. Used a lot, I would have been wrong. Second guess, probably liberty. It was also in heavy rotation, but not used most frequently. I think my third and final guess, I would have been wrong, freedom, right? Close cousin to liberty as well. And turns out that the word that appears to have been used the most as the framers of the Constitution were discussing the construction of this great nation and the fabric of how we would govern ourselves was demagogue.
I knew it was coming. Yep, they were terrified of a demagogue.
Was demagogue. And it appears that Alexander Hamilton used the word the most, apparently 13 or 14 times, and apparently made the observation that his biggest concern for the future of this country was that one day a demagogue might somehow manage to be elected as president, and over a 4-year period of time would endeavor to turn into a tyrant. I mean, it was what Alexander Hamilton expressed concern about. Now, they put a system into place so that you wouldn't see that type of extreme executive overreach be successful. And part of it was based on, of course, Congress functioning as a check and balance on an out-of-control executive branch. And then, of course, the Article 3 federal judiciary functioning as a check and balance, and lifting up at all times the rule of law over the rule of man. But I think we've seen a breakdown of the fabric that was put into place, both in terms of how Republicans have decided to function in Congress, and of course, with, I think, significant abdication of Supreme Court responsibility repeatedly, particularly as it relates to the so-called shadow docket.
I think that's right. But if we can dive into that a little bit, do you want to talk about the attempts that are ongoing right now to force a mid-decade redistricting? I think the Kansas delegation was at the White House today, was it not, where Trump is twisting arms to see if he can get a number of different states to redistrict their states in the middle of the cycle in order to try and protect himself against a loss in 2026. And then I want to talk, if we can, about the hearing today at the Supreme Court, which aims to do, I think, the same thing.
Yeah, no, this is an absolute concern. And, Donald Trump is attempting to rig the congressional map across the country as part of his effort to steal the midterm elections. Can't be said any more plainly than that. And this effort, of course, began initially in Texas, the largest Republican-held state in the country, where they are attempting to take 5 seats away from Democrats. Now we're going to fight hard to stop that from happening. We're in court right now, and we will contest many of the seats that they think they have converted from blue to red. But we also have made clear that we will respond forcefully, aggressively, and immediately, as was done in California, where Proposition 50 will be on the ballot on November 4th. Many Californians already have their ballots sitting on their kitchen room table. And we're urging, of course, a yes on Prop 50 to stop Trump from stealing the election. And what California will do is create opportunities to make sure that any gains Republicans think that we're making in Texas will be accounted for by gains we can make in the state of California. And we're thankful for the leadership of the congressional delegation, Governor Newsom, and enlightened people all across that great state. Now, of course, Donald Trump, particularly because of the unexpected and forceful response that he confronted in terms of California, is now looking elsewhere. And so, as you've indicated, I think they're looking to Indiana. Missouri is trying to flip 1 seat, and we're going to contest that as we are in court, and also present a referendum to the people of Missouri, which may be able to reverse what Republicans did in the dead of night in the Missouri legislature. They also are potentially going to try to go into Ohio, as well as Florida, and potentially Indiana as well. Now, we've said, consistent with California, that we will respond across the country. And we've heard Democratic governors in New York, Democratic governors in Illinois, the Democratic governor in Maryland make clear that we are not going to unilaterally disarm. Now, Heather, I think it's important for your viewers to know that one of the reasons why they're in a full-on panic is because Republican policies have failed the American people. Largest cut to Medicaid in American history, hospitals, nursing homes, and community-based health clinics closing throughout the country, including in rural America. Republicans are now refusing to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits, meaning tens of millions of Americans are going to experience dramatically increased premiums, copays, and deductibles. The cost of living in this country is already too high. Donald Trump and Republicans promised to lower costs on day one. They have failed. Costs aren't going down. They're going up. People are horrified at the extremism that is being unleashed on the American people, on law-abiding immigrant communities, on the rule of law, on the American way of life, on democracy itself. And so Republicans have no case to make in a midterm election. And Donald Trump is petrified that the American people are going to forcefully respond and throw House Republicans out of the majority, where we will have the ability to hold this Trump administration accountable. Now, we are also only 3 seats short. That's very different than the majority that Republicans had when Donald Trump came into office the first time, where there were 241 Republicans and only 194 Democrats. And in that midterm election, we needed to win 24 seats. We wound up winning 40. This time around, we only have to pick up a net gain of 3 seats, which is why the other side knows that they're heading toward defeat. And so they're trying to mathematically improve their position, but we will not allow them, and there's no circumstance where they will be able to gerrymander themselves to an artificial victory in 2026.
Okay, but here's what worries me. I look at what seems to me this extraordinary gulf between what the American people actually want, and we know that you're correct on that, and the machinations that the Republicans have engaged in really since 1986 to skew the electorate in their favor, not just Citizens United and Operation Red Map in 2010 that starts the really extreme partisan gerrymandering, but also attacks on the Voting Rights Act. And as we know, today the Supreme Court held a hearing on what would amount to be the gutting of Section 2 of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which made it possible for states to create districts that were majority minority in order to enable minority voters to guarantee that they could pick somebody that they actually wanted to represent them. Now, I'd love to have you walk us through that, but let me tell you what's got me worried about that. When I look at what's happening and the attacks of the Supreme Court on the Voting Rights Act and the gerrymandering and so on, what I see is what the former Confederates did in the American South after about 1874, in which they managed to turn half of the United States into a one-party state that overwhelmingly benefited a very small group of very rich people between 1874 and 1965, and they are just running the playbook. So what do you think about this idea that if in fact the Supreme Court gets rid of the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, that it really is not going to matter whether people turn out to vote in Republican-dominated states or not, because their state legislatures will be able to guarantee that essentially Democrats are denied equal access to choosing representatives?
Yeah, that is the concern. And listen, Republicans have adopted voter suppression and these kind of attacks on free and fair elections as an electoral strategy. You know, there had been a concern several years ago that if right-wing extreme conservatives concluded that they could no longer win elections democratically, they weren't going to abandon right-wing extreme conservatism. They were going to abandon democracy. And I think it's fair to say that that's what we've seen. They aren't trying to change their unpopular ideas. They continue to try to jam their unpopular ideas down the throats of the American people, including what was done in the One Big Ugly Bill, hurting everyday Americans in order to reward their billionaire donors with permanent massive tax breaks. They continue to be as extreme as ever, even though what they are doing is deeply unpopular, and then relying upon their ability to alter the electoral landscape. And so there is reason to be concerned as it relates to what the Supreme Court might try to do in gutting Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Now, what's interesting, and this is going to come down to Justice Roberts and Justice Kavanaugh, because just 2 years ago, in the Milligan decision coming out of the state of Alabama, in a surprise, Justice Roberts and Justice Kavanaugh upheld Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and actually mandated that the state of Alabama create a second majority Black district because of the racial gerrymandering that was otherwise taking place. And so if the Supreme Court were to do a complete 180, it would be as a result of Roberts and Kavanaugh essentially saying, never mind what we just said 2 years ago related to the state of Alabama, we've changed our perspective. As if, I guess, racism has somehow disappeared in the last 2 years, when the reality is exactly the opposite. What we've seen is that bigotry and racial gerrymandering and outright attacks on the ability of communities of color to elect the candidate of their choice has increased in intensity. I mean, the gerrymandering that we're seeing right now across the country, it's all targeting, for the most part, seats that are held by either African-American members of Congress or Latino members of Congress. All 5 seats in Texas that they are trying to rip away from the people of that state are held by either an African-American or Hispanic member of Congress. They, of course, are going after Representative Emanuel Cleaver's seat in Missouri, an African-American member of Congress from Kansas City. They've announced that they're going to go after Don Davis's seat in North Carolina. That's a Voting Rights Act protected seat. They could care less. They want to try to remove him from office. So I think the behavior that is actually taking place in real time, which is part of the court record and part of what these justices are going to have to consider, actually makes the case for the Voting Rights Act continuing to remain in effect. And so it's concerning. It is part of an outright concerted effort to alter the landscape of free and fair elections in the United States of America. But I'm thankful for the advocacy of the NAACP, Legal Defense Fund, and all of the related organizations that were successful 2 years ago in the Alabama case, and hopefully will be successful once more in preserving the all-important Voting Rights Act, the most important civil rights piece of legislation in American history.
Someday you and I are going to argue about that on the 14th, but okay. So one final question for you, Representative Jeffries. People always ask me, what can ordinary Americans who care about preserving our democracy do? If you could tell people what they should do in this moment, what would you tell them?
Well, it's important to show up whenever you're asked to speak up and to stand up. That's what John Lewis often said to us, that when you see an injustice, always be guided by those principles, and of course, be prepared to get into necessary trouble, good trouble. Now, what does that look like in this instance? What I would say, one, is that there's an ongoing effort right now to make sure that Prop 50 in California is successful. And, there are a lot of opportunities for people either to go to California or to reach into the state of California, even while remaining in your home state, to communicate with people as to why it's important to vote yes on Prop 50 as part of the effort to make sure that we have a fair congressional map in 2026. The other thing I would say is that there are some off-year elections that are going to be incredibly important that will also be on the ballot on November 4th, the governor's race in New Jersey and the governor's race in Virginia, which in many ways will be bellwethers for whether the country is going to accept the extremism that we've seen from Donald Trump and the Republicans, or send a very clear message that this extremism is rejected and we want to go in a different direction. And there are opportunities to volunteer in different ways as it relates to Abigail Spanberger's gubernatorial campaign in Virginia and Mikey Spanberger's gubernatorial campaign in New Jersey. These are going to be important indicators where the people will finally have an opportunity to express themselves through the manner in which the framers of the Constitution indicated we would in a representative democracy, which is the franchise exercising the right to vote. And imagine if we're successful in winning Virginia, winning New Jersey, and winning Prop 50 in California. That's the trifecta and a foundation for our country taking the steps that are necessary to eventually end this national nightmare and continue America's march toward a more perfect union.
From your lips, as they say. And just a reminder to people, there are actually 52,000 races on the ballot in November. Get involved in your home states, your hometowns, as well as in the national races. Thank you so much for being here, Representative Jeffries. And I'm going to thank you and let you go back to the halls of Congress and see if you can find somebody showing up to negotiate with.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here.